Hi everyone. The opening phrase of the parsha, Vayishma Yitro. Yitro heard. He heard about all the things that had taken place to the Jewish people, and he was genuinely moved by what he heard. The Midrash Tanchuma builds upon this phrase and really the word Vayishma. Yesh shama v'hifsid, the Midrash says, there are those who hear and they lose. And there are those v'yesh shama v'niskar, and they are rewarded for listening. Who are these people? Who listens and gets rewarded? Who listens and loses out because they listened? So the Midrash makes a very left field comparison here. We can guess who the one who is rewarded. That's Yitro. We'll get to him in a second. Yoash shama v'hifsid, the king of the southern kingdom of Israel, much later on in history, way after Yitro was ever walking on this earth, he heard something and he lost. Presumably he lost out on whatever reward he had. Shene'emar, as it says in Divrei Hayomim, in the book of Chronicles, second book of Chronicles, Az Shama, then he heard, same shoresh, Az Shama HaMelech, the king heard, King Yoash heard, Aleihem, what they were saying to him. And we'll get to what they were saying to him in just a moment. Let's just read the Midrash first. Lefichach, therefore, V'yet Yoash asu shfatim, because the Yoash had listened to what those around him were saying to him, he executed judgment. And we'll see in a moment who he executed judgment on. But it was not executed in a fair way and something that was criminal on Yoash's part. Aval Yitro, but Yitro, the father-in-law of Moshe, Shama v'niskar, he heard what was going on in the Jewish people. He heard and he was rewarded. How was he rewarded? Shaya komer la'avodah zara. Up until this point, he had been an idolatrous priest. Uva v'nidbak leMoshe, he came and he arrived to where the Jewish people were, and he cleaved and joined with Moshe. V'nichnas tachat kanfi ashchina, and he came under the wings of the divine presence. V'zocha, and he merited leyater parashat hadayonim liYisrael. He merited to add on a parsha in the Torah, and that's the section about the judges and the court system to that would be relevant for the Israelites. Sha'amar LaMoshe, when he said to Moshe, Lo tov hadavar asher ata oseh. Oh, what you're doing is not a good idea. You're trying to take all this burden on by yourself. You need to have others who are going to help you in setting up a judicial system. So Yitro heard and he was rewarded because he heard and acted in a way that brought himself under the Shekhinah, the divine presence of God. And King Yoash, who we'll talk about more in a second, he did something after he heard, and he did something horrible after he heard. So now the question is, what did he hear? And more of that, once we find that out, why is this comparison being made between Yitro and Yoash? So a little background. You can see this if you click on the link to the Sefaria source sheet. In Divrei Hayomim, the second book of Chronicles, which is like way at the end of Tanakh, we learn a little bit about King Yoash. King Yoash, he was his grandmother, in what's a crazy story, his grandmother, Atalia, she basically wiped out her own family, and as a baby, Yoash miraculously kind of escapes this situation, and once his grandmother is no longer in the picture and whatnot, ultimately at the age of 7, Yoash becomes king of the southern kingdom of Israel, of Yehudah. He was, I believe, the 8th king in the descendants of the Davidic descendants of kings, though I might be wrong about that last point. However, Yoash, again, Tanakh tells us, was crowned king at the age of 7. Now, if you're 7 years old when you take over as king, you better have someone who is at your side who can really help you succeed. And that person was the Kohen Gadol at that time, and that was Yehoyada. Yehoyada really helped Yoash. He was a positive influence on Yoash, and Yoash destroyed idolatry, which was often a problem during the period of the kings who follow Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. There was a serious problem of idolatry from the top, from the kings of Yehuda. And Yoash actually is not that, at least at the beginning of his life. And that's in large part, Tanakh teaches us, because of Yehoyada, the Kohen Gadol. However, Yehoyada was much older than Yoash, and no surprise, he dies first. And so we're told, V'acharei mot Yehoyada, after Yehoyada passed away, Bo Sur Yehuda, the officers of Yehuda came, V'yishtachavu lamelech, and they bowed down to the king. And Az Shama Amelech Alehem, and the king listened to them. And then what happened? We are told, Vayazvu et Beit Hashem Elokei Avotehem. After all this time, when he had strengthened the service of Hashem and the house of Hashem, and made it even better than it was before, he forsook the Beit HaMikdash. Vayavdu et Hashirim et Atzabim, and he started, serving idols and all sorts of other foreign ways of worship. And this was, and there was Vayiketzef al Yehuda v'Yerushalayim, and there was anger and wrath on Yehuda and Yerushalayim be'ashmatam zot, because of this sin, because of their guilt. And the Nevi'im started sending messages and admonishing him, and what are you doing after a career where you're doing such a great job? And even his son-in-law came. Notice, by the way, here's also a connection. You have a son-in-law, father-in-law situation like Moshe and Yitro. The son-in-law of Yoash was Zechariah, the prophet Zechariah. He had married the daughter of Yoash. And Zechariah was also critical publicly and to his father-in-law. And his father-in-law did not take kindly to this. What happened? Vayikshiru alav vayirgemuhu oven b'mitzvat hamelech b'chatzar beit Hashem. His father-in-law executed just judgment. Remember, I said a moment ago, he executed something. He executed his son-in-law. And not only did he execute his son-in-law by stoning him, it happened b'chatzar beit Hashem. It happened in the courtyard of the Beit HaMikdash. The Torah, the Tanakh tells us, "V'lo zachar Yoash hamelach et hachesed asher asa Yehoyada v'imo." Yoash, the king, did not remember the kindness of Yehoyada. Yehoyada was the Kohen Gadol, who was the father of Zechariah. Vayaharog et beno, and he killed his son, who also was his son-in-law. And at the end, Kamoto Amar, as Zechariah was dying, he said, Yireh Hashem v'yidrosh. May God see and basically avenge what's happening to me. If you look carefully, by the way, in the book of Eicha, there's a pasuk that says, alas, a priest and a prophet are slain in the sanctuary of the Lord. Probably a reference to this, that Zechariah was murdered in the Beit HaMikdash, was stoned by his father-in-law, the King Yoash. And so now we have to think about what's the connection here. Why are they compared? We see how he heard and he lost, and Yitro heard and he gained. Well, there's one more midrash that actually plays in here, also from the Medrash Tanchuma. You can look at it, I put it on the source sheet as well. But basically, at the age of 7, I told you he was saved, or he became king. What happened during those first 7 years when his family was wiped out by his grandmother? And the story goes in the midrash that those first 7 years, he was hidden in the Holy of Holies, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the Beit HaMikdash. And so what did they say to him? Az Shama HaMelech Aleim, when after Yehoiada died, they came to Yoash and what did they tell him? And they were bowing down to him. They said, Sh'asa'uhu Eloah, they were basically making him into a king. They said to him, Ilulei Sh'ata Eloah. Because if you're not a king, if you're not a god, that's what I meant. They made him into a god. Lo yatzata lachar sheva shanim mibeit HaKodshei HaKadoshim. How could you have survived 7 years in the Kodesh HaKadoshim? The Kohen Gadol was allowed to go in there once a year, and anyone goes in there not proper time, they die. You were in there for 7 years. You were saved. You must be a god. And what happened? Amar lahem kacho. You're right. I am a god. V'kibel al atzmo le'asot Eloah. You should bow down to me. I am a god. He heard what they said to him. And he took it and he turned it into such a terrible, profane thing. He heard and he went in the opposite direction of God. Yitro heard and went towards God. And I believe that aside from the father-in-law, son-in-law thing, which I pointed out earlier, the connection is also that we can hear things in life that we're told. And it is up to us, it is our choice whether or not we're going to take that information and use it. Well, first of all, assess, is it accurate? But once we can assess that, well, what attitude are we coming into every conversation with? Are we looking for ways to increase our connection to God, which is also another way of saying I'm pursuing, truth and justice, which Yitro, he understood God's power, he heard the stories, he believed it. And he said, this is something I need to be a part of. Yoash, after all life devoted to God, suddenly people are telling him he is something special. And he's like, you know what? You're right, it is me. It's not God, it's me. And it's all about how we're looking for things, how we're looking to hear things, and how we're looking to approach it. Yoash, when he didn't have that positive influence in his life like Yehoiada, he allowed those who were speaking to him to make him hear things that would pull him away from God. Yitro heard things, and he came in with an attitude of looking to be pulled in spiritually. And we see this, in his setting up of the court system. He wanted the justice and the fairness of God's ways to be accessible to all. And by setting up a system like this, he did allow that to happen. Message for all of us is that when we are hearing things out there, we need to take an attitude of how am I going to process the information in front of me so that it helps my spiritual well-being, that it helps me see God in this world and make me come closer, tachat kanfei hashchina, under the wings of the divine presence. I'm sorry it was a little bit longer this week, but it was very important that we develop who Yoash was so that we could understand this midrash. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next week.